The S&P 500 down 5 points. You're listening to NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from Dreamwave, maker of luxury massage chairs from Japan, with shiatsu point detection and 16 programmed massages, including morning, night, and stretch sessions. Retailers nationwide. More at dreamwavechair.com. And the Annie E. Casey Foundation.
It's 5:04, and I'm Lisa Peaks with WUSF 89.7 News. The president of the Tallahassee-based First Amendment Foundation is tracking the 2019 legislative session. And as WUSF's Susan Giles One-Tuck reports, there are bills to prevent access to videos or audio of the events surrounding mass shootings.
Barbara Peterson says she understands what lawmakers are trying to do, but they may not foresee the effects such legislation might have. And she's uneasy with government policing itself.
And it's not that we don't trust them, but as Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. Why are we creating all these public records exemptions? Now, some of them are justified, but not all of them, and not enough of them.
For example, at Parkland, the Coral Springs police chief says when his officers showed up, they found Broward County deputies hiding, not responding to the attack. Peterson says the public only found out what happened after the videos were released. Susan Giles, One-Tuck, WUSF 89.7 News.
2 ships that are replicas of the vessels Christopher Columbus sailed on have docked in Palmetto. One of them is considered the most historically accurate ship ever built. The Nina was Christopher Columbus's favorite sailing ship, and over 3 trips to the New World beginning in 1492, he logged 25,000 miles on it. The replica of the Portuguese-style ship called the Caravel was built entirely by hand. But First Mate David Zenk says it does have some modern updates.
We emphasize the fact that we are a 15th century caravel with some very nice 21st century navigation and communication devices.
A newer, bigger version called the Pinta sails with it. They're docked in Palmetto until March 18th and are open to the public. Well, Spectrum Bay 9 Chief Meteorologist Mike Clay says just a few clouds tonight with a low 63, and tomorrow and Sunday, partly sunny and warm with a 10% chance of showers and highs 82 degrees. It's 5:06.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. In northeastern Syria, people are pouring out of the last ISIS stronghold. It's a dramatic scene. Women leading children by the hand, carrying overstuffed backpacks, walking across an empty plain. Coalition forces say they're giving civilians time to flee and ISIS fighters a chance to surrender before they make a final push to clear out of the area. Sarah El-Deeb with the Associated Press is in this part of Syria and joins us now. Welcome.
Thank you.
Explain who these people are that are leaving this week and what they're telling you when you talk to them.
We've seen thousands of people finally evacuate the last pocket. They were mostly women and children, and they were either really beat and very hungry and tired, or very defiant and defensive of the Islamic State.
That explains the sort of defiant shouting that we heard in that tape. When we spoke to you more than 2 weeks ago, commanders of U.S.-backed forces were saying that there were days, maybe even just hours left for ISIS in the area before these Western forces controlled this area, and it has obviously much longer than that. Why has it been so much more complicated than they thought?
I mean, I think the word is that there are lots of civilians that keep coming out of that pocket, and no one wants to see a massacre in the final battle against ISIS of lots of civilians. I think that's one thing. It's made to contain or to take about 10,000 people more or less, and now it's got 65,000 people, most of them in the last 3 months. It's cold, it's desert, it's very wet, there's no tents. There are lots of children that arrive there in really bad condition because of the really long trip. It's like hours on the road in a very rugged terrain, very cold conditions. So we know of like 100 people that might have died because of that road trip, like hypothermia, malnutrition. So I think it's just a really terrible place to be at the moment.
Yeah. We're describing this as the last of ISIS's territory, the last stronghold, but your reporting makes it clear that there is still support for this group among people in the region.
It almost feels like we're taking out the Islamic State militants out of that pocket and putting them out in the world, like seeds for an Islamic State. I don't want to be alarmist, but I think from what I've seen, a lot of the women that spoke to us are saying that they will bring up their kids to be jihadists for what the group stands for. A lot of them are angry and defiant and humiliated. That's not a very reassuring message.
Sarah Aldeeb, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ari.
She's a reporter for the Associated Press speaking with us from Syria. Now we're going to talk with someone who helped coordinate the U.S. fight against ISIS for years. In December, Brett McGurk was one of the strongest voices objecting to President Trump's announcement that he planned to pull all U.S. troops out of Syria. McGurk was the U.S. envoy to the global coalition against ISIS. He and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis both announced their resignations in reaction to President Trump's withdrawal plan. Since then, the president has modified his plans, saying at least 400 troops will stay in the country. Ambassador Brett McGurk, welcome to All Things Considered.
Thank you for having me.
You moved up your resignation date over President Trump's decision to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. Now that the administration has walked back its decision to immediately remove all American troops, do you regret the decision at all?
Well, no, certainly not. I think, if anything, the fact that my decision, and the same week with Secretary Mattis, made the point that what the president had done was quite reckless. And if it caused him to rethink, then obviously I feel even better about it.
Do you think the resignation was partly responsible for his reevaluating the plan and walking it back?
Well, I can't say that, but I think it made the point that to just withdraw all of our forces before the campaign was even complete was a particularly reckless and rash decision, without much consideration or thought as to what would come next.
Do you think there is no plan for what's going to come next? When you left, you said the administration had no strategy.
Well, we did. We had a pretty good campaign plan in place. You defeat the physical caliphate, and then you need to stay on the ground for a time, in particular to support the Syrian Democratic Forces. What we did in Syria is quite remarkable. They built this force of 60,000 Syrians, Arabs, Christians, Kurds, to defeat ISIS and to take down cities like Raqqa without a single American casualty. And so we now have a force called the Syrian Democratic Forces. We need to support them. You have thousands of the most hardened ISIS fighters and their families coming out of Baghouz, and the SDF now needs to detain them and hold them. And so were we to just abandon the SDF, there's a good chance these people are going to be back on the streets. That's something that just cannot happen.
Given that these extremist views and the people who hold them will likely stay in the region for months or years, would you anticipate U.S. troops potentially staying there for months or years?
Well, what I would really advise the president to do is just stop the withdrawal order. So I think it's good that the president's obviously reconsidered his order to withdraw all U.S. forces, but I'm asking them to withdraw to about 200, which is basically a 90% reduction of the force in the Northeast. As they're dealing with this very difficult dynamic situation, I just don't think there's much logic to it. So I would advise the president, halt the withdrawal order and give commanders and our diplomats some time and space to work through what they're dealing with on the ground. Asking our military to withdraw in the middle of this is going to cause just increased risk to the force, increased risk to the mission, and increased risk to ISIS resurging.
So on one hand, you point to the huge success of getting ISIS out of this enormous swath of Iraq and Syria that included cities of Mosul and Raqqa. And on the other hand, you're saying there is a real threat still there. Do you think there is a risk of ISIS rebounding to where it was before? Is that the threat we're talking about?
I do not. I do not ascribe to the ISIS 2.0 that it can come back to the level we saw in 2014. But we have seen, and you have to learn lessons from history, that when extremist fighters are warehoused in prisons and eventually get out, they're able to clandestine cells, clandestine networks, and they can resurge and they can greatly jeopardize the stability of Iraq, and they can threaten us. So to never get out, and that requires some U.S. commitment. This is not an endless war. This is not American combat formations fighting, but it is enabling locals to try to ensure that these safe havens can open up.
Even if President Trump does reverse the withdrawal order, hasn't he made clear that he wants out soon, and aren't American allies and adversaries just going to inevitably wait until that eventual date arrives, even if he does postpone it?
Well, yes, and that's why withdrawing 90%, the kind of muddle through option, could actually be the worst option. It's really stay with the 2,000 you have and allow our diplomats and commanders to work out the next phase, or make clear you're leaving and make honest to the partners we're working with that they have to make accommodations with other actors to survive.
You worked on this region for more than a decade under 3 very different presidents, Republicans and Democrats. How does President Trump's decision-making style differ from the other presidents who you worked for?
Oh boy, it's hard to answer that question because there isn't really a decision-making style. I mean, the decisions are erratic. They're done without process, without deliberation, without input of experts. And in the case of Syria, he made this hugely strategic, consequential decision in late December after a call with a foreign leader, with President Erdogan of Turkey, without any process that led up to that major decision. So in terms of process with President Trump, there is no process.
Brett McGurk, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
He was the envoy to the coalition fighting ISIS before resigning in December, and he's now at Stanford University.
President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump went to Lee County, Alabama today to see for themselves the destruction caused by Sunday's tornadoes. The Trumps walked through fields of debris. They hugged survivors and stopped at a memorial, 23 white crosses, one for each person who died. Meanwhile, residents continued with funerals and cleanup, as NPR's Russell Lewis reports from Beauregard, Alabama.
There wasn't much time for Jennifer Vernon and her husband Joe to see President Trump as he toured their now decimated neighborhood. The Vernons' home was completely destroyed. This afternoon, a small skid steer loader was picking up what was left of their house, now strewn across their front yard. Joe says the past week has been difficult.
Day by day. That's all you can do. Can't give up.
Jennifer was picking through huge piles of debris, looking to see what she could salvage. She found some clothing and a tiny Christmas ornament, but not much else. She's been through this before. Her home burned down 6 months ago.
We lost everything in September, so that was all the sentimental stuff that was gone then. Now it's just stuff that we've gotten since then, so it wasn't anything that was of any sentimental value now.
The Vernons haven't heard from their insurance adjuster, and they can't yet think about what to do next. Across the street, Juanita Smith was standing on an elevated concrete pad. It used to be her front porch. Now it's the only thing left of her house. She's 84 and retired and was stacking some knickknacks, plates, and shoes, including a fancy, sparkly blue ballroom sandal.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if anything worth saving don't look like it is.
Smith seemed overwhelmed by it all, and she's not sure whether she'll rebuild here or move into her son's home, which is just down the hill.
I really haven't thought about it, tell you the truth, because it's such a heartbreaking thing to see, so I really don't know.
Smith is sad for the 23 people who died in the tornado and for the loss of her neighborhood, which she said used to look like a lush park. Now she says it reminds her of a landfill. Russell Lewis, NPR News, Beauregard, Alabama.
And stay with us for more here on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Coming up on the program, we'll hear about the government's February unemployment report. It showed the job market's worst performance in nearly a year and a half.
The 20,000 jobs added in February was much, much lower than anyone expected.
The disappointing number could turn All Things Considered. And there's more business news with Marketplace coming up at 6 o'clock, right after All Things Considered. Apparently, stocks ended lower, but we'll get the full picture again at 6. Well, Circus Sarasota 2019 showcases its new program now through March 10th. This new cast of international circus artists performs under the Big Top at Nathan Benderson Park in Sarasota. Tickets at circusarts.org. And support for WUSF comes from our listeners at Nova Southeastern University. When you earn your MBA in Human Resource Management, you don't just graduate, you dominate. NSU gives you an edge through a curriculum created by real-world professionals. Classes start March 11th. nova.edu/MBA.
I'm Ira Plato. On the next Science Friday, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine joins us to talk about sending humans to the moon and Mars, mining asteroids, and the role of companies like SpaceX in the future of American spaceflight. We'll be answering your questions too. It's all on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
7, right after BBC News here on WUSF 89.7. Nice weather ahead. Spectrum Bay News 9 Chief Meteorologist Mike Clay says partly cloudy skies tonight with a low 63. Partly sunny and warm Saturday with a high 82 and a 10% chance of showers. Remember, you want to adjust your clocks, the ones that don't automatically update Saturday before you go to bed, because Sunday at 2 a.m. daylight saving time goes into effect. It's 5:20 and this is WUSF.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from T. Rowe Price, offering a strategic investing approach that examines investment opportunities firsthand. Institutions, advisors, employers, and individuals choose T. Rowe Price. T. Rowe Price. Invest with confidence. And from DXC Technology, designing and deploying global digital solutions that integrate with a client's mainstream IT. Learn more at dxc.technology. DXC Technology. Thrive on change.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. New photographs suggest North Korea is preparing to launch a missile or space rocket. This comes just more than a week after President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un walked away from their nuclear summit with no agreement. NPR has been shown commercial satellite imagery of renewed activity at a facility where North Korea has assembled ICBMs and satellite rockets in the past. And this activity is at a different site from the one we've been discussing the last few days. Science and security correspondent Jeff Brumfield broke this story and joins us now in the studio. Hi, Jeff.
Hi there.
You've seen these photos. When were they taken and what do they show?
These photos were taken on February 22nd by a company called Digital Globe, and analysis from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies shows that basically what we're seeing is vehicle activity and activity at a nearby rail yard that is consistent with the preparation of a missile or rocket, we're not quite sure which, at this facility, and the missile or rocket may have indeed already left. It may still be under assembly. Again, we're not quite sure, but this is consistent with activity for preparing either an intercontinental ballistic missile or a space launch.
You've got those photos right in front of you. They're also posted online at npr.org. It was just days ago that another North Korea missile site appeared to have new activity. What's happening at that site and how does it fit in with today's news?
So that site's actually called the Sohae Satellite Launch Facility, and it basically is a site that North Korea has used in the past to launch satellites. Now, after Trump and Kim's first summit in June of last year, that site was partially disassembled as a goodwill gesture, and then sometime around the time of the Hanoi summit, everything was put together very, very quickly. And in fact, imagery from earlier this week showed the site is apparently completely reassembled now and may even be operational. So these two things together suggest that we may be looking at a possible upcoming space launch, not a missile launch. North Korea has been talking about launching some satellites, and so that might be what they're intending to do.
Often it's impossible to know exactly what's happening in North Korea or what the intentions of the North Koreans might be, but can you try to put this activity into context for us? What does this mean?
Sure. I mean, we don't have a lot of great on-the-ground intelligence in North Korea, and we really rely on satellite images, especially outside of the government, for making any sorts of guesses. And the North Koreans know that. They use these moves to signal to the U.S. and to other countries that they're, thinking this way or that. I think a satellite launch is kind of an interesting signal if that's where we're headed. It looks in many ways like a missile launch, yet the North Koreans can claim it's peaceful. I think it would be seen as provocative. Yesterday, a senior State Department official said it would be seen as sort of backsliding in terms of the goodwill that Trump and Kim have built.
So maybe a reason to worry, but not an explicit immediate threat. Is that the assessment?
Absolutely, yeah. This is not a threat. We don't even know when this launch could happen. It could be in a matter of days. It could be in weeks. It could be next month. There's an important anniversary coming up in North Korea that they may try and time some sort of launch to. But nonetheless, it does seem to be a further indication that the two sides are moving further apart post Hanoi summit.
It's NPR science and security correspondent Jeff Brumfield who broke this story of renewed activity at a North Korean missile assembly site. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
In 1989, 6 people in Beatrice, Nebraska were sent to prison for rape and murder they didn't commit. The so-called Beatrice Six were eventually exonerated based on DNA evidence. Now the county that prosecuted them owes them $28.1 million after the Supreme Court opted to let a lower court's ruling stand. Earlier, Chris Dunker of the Lincoln Journal-Star told us how the original case was built on false confessions, that the suspects were convinced they were repressing traumatic memories of the rape and murder of 68-year-old Helen Wilson.
A private investigator hired by the Wilson family named Bert Searcy eventually got hired by the Gage County Sheriff's Office, built this case, targeted some people that were kind of on the fringes of society. 5 of the 6 who originally claimed they had nothing to do with it eventually, during interrogations, were convinced that they were there. There was a police psychologist named Wayne Price who also treated these folks, and he had told a couple of them that if they just went to sleep, that their dreams would help them remember what had gone wrong there. And 2 of them eventually came back and said, "Oh yeah, now I remember what happened. I dreamed it last night, and I can see the murder, and these people were all there." Joseph White was the only one who maintained his innocence through the whole thing. He willingly gave some hair and blood and saliva samples to cops. All of this evidence, physical evidence from the case, kind of sat in a basement. And in 2008, he won the right to have this evidence tested, and it showed that this DNA that they collected at the scene did not belong to him, nor did it belong to any of the other 5 people.
And Joseph White died in 2011, right?
Correct.
But this lawsuit continues. What's the argument behind it?
Yeah, it was against the Gage County Sheriff's Office, particularly Bert Searcy and Wayne Price, for leading an investigation that they said shocked the conscience. These people were coerced into giving false confessions against one another. There was gaps in these interview tapes when, before the tape shut off, these folks were saying, I can't remember anything about this. And when they come back, all of a sudden they remembered this murder as it supposedly happened in pretty clear detail. So they came back later and said that Searcy and Price had kind of been feeding them details related to how the murder happened and violated their civil rights.
Now that the Supreme Court has let a lower court's decision stand, Gage County owes the plaintiffs more than $28 million, right?
Correct.
This is a county that only has 22,000 residents, so how are they going to pay for this?
Counties are limited in Nebraska in how they can raise revenue. The only way that they can do it is through a property tax. That is falling primarily on farmers and large landowners in the county who make up a minority of the county's population, only about 15% of the county's population, but they own 75% of the taxable land.
How are people in the county reacting to this?
They're pretty mad. A couple of farmers from Gage County came to testify to the legislature that, they had nothing to do with the investigation. They just, were farmers going about their business. One man said that the additional tax hike was going to add $10,000 in property taxes to his bill each year, and this is expected to last for close to a decade. So we're looking at $100,000 in added taxes that man might have to pay. I've talked to folks that say that they were really young when this whole thing happened. They weren't able to vote for the sheriff or any of the county supervisors or anybody like that are now having to pay this judgment, even though they knew next to nothing about it.
Finally, what does this mean for these people who were exonerated?
Their attorneys have said that they're not viewing any of this as a victory lap. My colleague Lori Pilger talked to Joseph White's mother earlier this week, Lois, and she said that she didn't expect to see any of this money. Essentially, that her main objective in the whole thing was to see her son's name cleared, and that the folks that put him there were held up to the light for the world to see.
Chris Dunker is a reporter for Star. Thank you for sharing your reporting with us.
Thank you.
This is NPR News.
This is W. USF 89.7 News NPR. On all things considered, outsourcing military intelligence.
These problems, they require creative solutions. And I think trying to outsource them to the people who live in a society where creativity is encouraged and then giving a little bit of financial incentive to that, I think that's a really healthy model.
Our American Homefront series looks at how the Pentagon is training civilians in defense technology. Support for WUSF comes from our contributing listeners. Thank you so much for making this great programming possible. We get additional support from the marital and family law firm of Harris, Hunt & Durr, protecting each client, the family unit, and their financial future. Experience trial advocacy, tough negotiation, and effective collaboration. Harris, Hunt & Durr, protection without destruction. And support comes from Total Wine and More, where friendly in-store teams can recommend the perfect bottle of wine, spirit, or beer for any occasion. Total Wine and More. 8,000 wines, 2,500 beers, 3,000 spirits. More at TotalWine.com. You know, you can avoid all the hassle of trying to sell your old car yourself, detailing it, getting it up on whatever list you want, putting up signs. Donate it to WUSF. We will take care of everything start to finish. Call 866-WUSF-CAR or donate online at WUSF.org/vehicle. Another great way to support your NPR station. It's 5:30.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. President Trump was in Alabama today surveying the damage left by a series of deadly tornadoes. He and the First Lady observed a moment of silence as they stood before a row of 23 crosses, one for each person killed by a powerful twister that touched down in Lee County last Sunday. Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson has announced her resignation. Wilson says she's the sole finalist to become the next president of the University of Texas at El Paso. As NPR's Tom Bowman reports, Wilson had clashed with officials during her tenure.
Wilson was seen by some in the administration as stalling plans for a new Space Force. Among those she angered was the acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan. The Air Force Secretary was among those mentioned as a possible Defense Secretary nominee herself, but Pentagon sources say it's increasingly likely that Shanahan will get the nod. Wilson is an Air Force Academy graduate. In her letter to President Trump, Wilson touted her accomplishments, improving the readiness of the force, speeding the acquisition process, and cutting superfluous regulations. Wilson noticeably did not thank Trump, saying, "I very much appreciate the opportunity to have served." Tom Bowman, NPR News, Washington.
The U.S. economy added far fewer jobs last month than economists had expected. Employers added 20,000 jobs in February. NPR's Jim Zarroli reports 185,000 were expected.
This was really a performance expecting 180 or 200,000 jobs created during the month, and it turned out to be just 20,000.
NPR's Jim Zarroli reporting. Stocks closed lower today on Wall Street. The Dow was down 22 points. The Nasdaq fell 13. The S&P 500 down 5. This is NPR News.
It's 5:32, and I'm Lisa Peaks with WUSF 89.7 News. Some Tampa Bay residents want better conditions for bicyclists. WUSF's Ashley Lisenby met with a Tampa group that was biking to work this morning to raise awareness about what it's like on the road.
Bicycle advocate Christina Costa organized one early morning ride from Buddy Brew Coffee Shop in Hyde Park. The Bike to Work Day comes on the heels of reports that the Tampa Bay region has some of the highest incidents of automotive accidents, including pedestrians and cyclists in the country.
In the urban environments where we have small streets and slower moving traffic, all the cities in the Bay Area are making tremendous progress on becoming more bike friendly.
Advocates say that includes new bike lanes throughout the city. Groups meet in Tampa Heights, Ybor City, and the Channel District to ride to a downtown rally to promote bike safety and environmental awareness. Residents can take the Tampa Bay Commuters Pledge, a commitment to riding public transit, walking, and biking until June. Ashley Lisenby, WUSF 89.7 News.
Bills have been filed in the Florida House and Senate that would commit the state to transitioning to 100% renewable energy by 2050. Environmentalists note that this is the first time such bills have been proposed in Florida, so they're cautiously optimistic about it passing. Jennifer Rubiello of St. Petersburg is director of the advocacy group Environment Florida.
Burning oil, gas, and coal have polluted our air and water and land for decades, and now we have already seen that it's changing our climate even faster than most scientists feared it would. And we know that we can have healthier communities right now and a livable future for generations to come, but to get there, we actually need to transform the way that we both produce and consume energy.
Rubiello says that 7 Florida cities, including St. Petersburg, have already committed to switching to renewable energy. Coming up on All Things Considered, we'll hear what happened when 2 congressmen exchanged strong opinions about the band Nickelback on the House floor yesterday. Stay with us. Support today comes from MD Anderson Proton Therapy Center, precisely targeting head and neck tumors to reduce the chance of loss of taste, malnutrition, and feeding tube dependency. More at mdandersonproton.org/head and neck. It's 5:35.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Capital One, offering a variety of credit card options with features for a range of customers, from foodies to travelers. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Credit approval required. Capital One Bank, USA, NA. And from Elsevier, a global information analytics business serving scientists and clinicians with a commitment to helping them to manage their work more efficiently so they can spend more time making breakthroughs. Elsevier.com.
From NPR News, it's All Things Considered. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. The U.S. job market had been racing ahead for months. In February, it braked to a sudden halt. The Labor Department said just 20,000 jobs were created last month. Economists say the disappointing number may turn out to be something of a fluke. Here's NPR's Jim Zarroli.
There was no getting around it. The number of jobs created in February was a surprise and a disappointment. It was the job market's worst performance in nearly a year and a half. Heidi Shearholtz is with the Economic Policy Institute.
The 20,000 jobs added in February was much, much lower than anyone expected.
But Shearholtz cautioned against reading too much into the numbers. She points out that they came after a blockbuster January.
1 month's numbers do not make a trend.
Shearholtz says when you average out the job gains over the past few months, you get something closer to 186,000, which is a good number. Why has there been so much volatility? Shearholtz says it may have been the big snowstorm last month. She notes that the biggest losses were in construction and leisure and hospitality.
Those are the kinds of industries that you see being disproportionately affected by bad weather.
For his part, President Trump chose to gloss over the weak job growth and focus on the more positive parts of the report. Unemployment fell from 4 to 3.8%, and wages rose a healthy amount.
I think the big news really was that wages went up. And that's great for the American worker. That's something people, I don't know if they ever expected to see.
After years of tepid growth, wages have been rising, which usually happens in a tight labor market like the one we have today. But Lindsay Piegza, chief economist at Stifel Fixed Income, says enjoy it while it lasts.
And unfortunately, at this point, the concern is that the recent gains in wages are going to prove very short-lived.
Like a lot of economists, she sees the U.S. economy slowing, and that will inevitably have an effect on wages. Today's report adds fuel to the debate over whether the strong economy will last and how much American workers can hope to benefit. Jim Zarroli, NPR News, New York.
One of the keys to President Trump's success in the 2016 election was his campaign promise to bring back American manufacturing jobs. This week, some 1,700 union members at a manufacturing plant in northwest Pennsylvania were on picket lines in a labor dispute with their employer. NPR's Don Gagne was there. He spoke with them about the president, the economy, and the 2020 presidential race.
This demonstration took place this week outside of Pittsburgh at the headquarters of Wabtec Corporation. Many of the picketers with the Union of Electrical Workers came by bus 2 hours from Erie, Pennsylvania, where they had been on strike for more than a week. The issue, a concessionary contract that would include lower wages for new hires.
Erie is our union, stand up, stand down. Erie is our union, stand up, stand down.
The strike has since ended as negotiations continue, but it's where I talked with union member Sharon Ruperto.
Can I ask who you voted for president?
Trump.
You voted for Trump?
Yes.
Are you still on board with Trump?
Yes, I am.
Trump narrowly won Erie County, Pennsylvania, a place that had gone twice by wide margins for Barack Obama. Trump's win there and statewide in Pennsylvania was helped by votes from white working-class voters, many of them union members. Ruperto drives a forklift at the plant and says she's an Obama voter who switched to Trump. She thinks Democrats have moved too far to the left, and she doesn't know why union leaders are so quick to vilify Trump.
Trump hasn't said anything about a union. I have not heard him try to break unions. They keep saying he's against unions, but I've never seen him go after a union.
The unemployment rate in Erie County has improved by 2 points since Trump took office. It's now 4.7%. But while the president pledged to bring back manufacturing, the share of the local workforce represented by manufacturing jobs continues to decline. That and the strike add to the anxiety of workers like 55-year-old Ron Dunkowski.
I can show you pictures of me at the Trump rallies because I was a Trump supporter, a big Donald Trump supporter, because I wanted to keep jobs in America.
Today, he sees pressure to cut wages at his own plant. He sees the big GM Lordstown assembly plant nearby in Ohio closing. He sees his son, even with a college degree, struggling to make a decent wage. I asked him about Trump.
You're kind of soft-spoken when you're talking about him, and is it disappointment with him? I mean,
well, I'm also a veteran, so I like what he wants to do, for people in the armed forces and for veterans. So, I mean, yeah, there's still things I like about Donald Trump, but I think he's letting the American worker down.
Donald Trump no longer has his vote. 60-year-old union member Dale Meyer was also at the protest.
Yeah, I mean, there are some of us that do agree with Trump, and there's a lot of people that don't agree with Trump.
Okay, so you voted for Trump.
I did.
Are you still with him?
I'm not against him, but I would be with him.
But he's far from gung-ho and says he's not sure how he'll vote in 2020. Scott Slauson is president of the Union of Electrical Workers in Erie. It's a union that endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016. Slauson says Democrats better have learned this lesson: never to take votes for granted.
Back in 2016, Donald Trump took this county, and I think one of the fatal mistakes that was made was the Democrats just simply overlooked this county.
As for union members who voted Trump, Slauson
yesterday. Democratic Congressman Mark Pocan of Wisconsin dissed the group while debating a voting rights provision.
77,000 people did comment. Only 4 wanted to keep this provision. That's probably about the percent of people who think Nickelback is their favorite band in this country. It's pretty low.
What Pocan didn't expect was to find a true Nickelback fan right across the aisle.
Why would you criticize one of the greatest bands of the 90s?
Wow.
Congressman Rodney Davis, a Republican from Illinois, passionately defended Nickelback's honor.
I actually do have a Nickelback song on my running playlist that I listen to on a regular basis. I know he did not mean to offend the many thousands upon thousands of Nickelback fans in his district in Wisconsin.
NPR Music's Stephen Thompson is from Wisconsin. He had something to say about that.
Mark Pocan is not losing his seat over Nickelback.
This is hardly the first time Nickelback has found itself a punchline. After all, they did once lose a popularity contest to a pickle.
Still, Nickelback shouldn't take this too hard. After all, how many bands can say they made it to the House floor?
I'm just glad that this conversation is in the congressional record, that now it belongs to the ages.
Stephen Thompson of NPR Music, take us out, Nickelback.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
It's true. You don't have to check your dial. This is WUSF 89.7. News, jazz, NPR. It's 5:44, and I'm Lisa Peaks. The dizzying pace of technological innovation means that the military needs outside brainpower. Many techies, entrepreneurs, and academics are not interested in military life or military pay. So the Pentagon is trying new ways to harness their skills. For our American Homefront project, Jay Price reports.
A Duke University class is on a field trip to
to a Green Beret compound on Fort Bragg.
One final thing, and I debated whether or not I wanted you guys to do this, because it's pretty brutal.
For the day, the professor is a special operations medic named Chandler, his gear still dusty from a recent deployment in Africa. The class is getting a whirlwind immersion in the job of combat medic, including how to keep breathing passages open. Matt Hawkins, a 24-year-old graduate student in mechanical engineering, gamely volunteers to have a stiff-looking hose shoved into his nose, way into his nose.
So, Bevel's first septum, can you take nostril? Oh, yeah, that hurts.
It's the first semester of a course called Hacking for Defense, and a tiny part of the potential solution to a daunting problem: how to keep the U.S. #1 in defense technology. The course tackles real-world problems like streamlining the gear that medics carry. Hawkins said that when he heard about the course, he was intrigued.
I saw a lot of opportunity, largely because the problems weren't defined yet. All you knew was that you'd be getting put in a small team. You would be trying to get an idea started that you could eventually maybe even start a company out of, and that was really attractive.
Hawkins has interned with an aerospace company and is interested in aeronautical engineering. He's not just smart and tech-savvy, but athletic. Members of his family who he deeply respects are veterans, and in another era, he might have joined up. But while he's so keenly interested in helping the military that he cheerfully volunteered for that tube up the nose, he figures actually enlisting isn't a good fit.
The problems that I want to tackle are a little bit broader than what I believe I could do as a serviceman. And I think not going through the military would give me a little bit more flexibility in terms of my use of time.
Making him exactly the kind the Pentagon needs to reach. The class is led by Tommy Sowers. He's a Special Forces team leader turned tech startup guy turned kind of solutions ambassador between the military and civilian worlds. Sowers' title is Southeast Director for MD5. This small Pentagon program has people like him in about 7 tech-centric regions and 4 universities now, and it's about to add dozens more.
For our nation to continue to succeed, we can't just tap into the 1% of folks that are serving. So our organization is trying to create new pathways for those in universities, those in the venture tech world, to serve their country doing what they do best and helping us adopt the best technology that's out there.
MD5 is just one of several Pentagon initiatives aimed at harnessing civilian brain power. Peter Singer at the think tank New America says there are 2 key reasons for the new programs. One is the nature of what the military needs.
The technologies themselves, whether it's AI or robotics, are not inherently military. And the Pentagon is finding that the civilian market is the one that's doing the cutting edge work, and therefore they need to reach across to it in better ways.
And the second reason for all these military ambassadors to the civilian capitals of innovation?
China, 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 China.
Singer says China is the kind of economic, military, and technological competitor that the U.S. hasn't faced in decades. Our political system is different, so we aren't likely to force a national effort to make advances in, say, artificial intelligence. But the Pentagon can counter by reaching out to the private sector. Singer says it could take a couple of decades before we know whether that works. Hawkins, the young engineering student, thinks it could.
These problems, they require creative solutions, and I think trying to outsource them to the people who live in a society where creativity is encouraged, and then giving a little bit of financial incentive to that, just encouragement or mentorship in the case of this class, I think that's a really healthy model.
And it's a model that reached him, which is a start. This is Jay Price reporting.
Whether you're a homeowner or not, housing data is an important economic indicator. Understanding that data, though, is a whole other thing.
We're always hearing about the current number, but we hardly ever hear about the revision, and of course the revision is where the interest is.
I'm Connor Brisbell, step by step through the housing data next time on Marketplace.
Marketplace coming up at 6 o'clock, right after All Things Considered, here on WUSF 89.7. Was a down day on Wall Street. There's a disappointing report on hiring by U.S. employers. That got trading off to a bad start. There's also the latest sign of weakness in the global economy. We'll take a closer look at all the business news and numbers coming up at 6. Local support for All Things Considered comes from Sarasota Memorial Healthcare System, the only hospital in Florida to consistently earn 5-star ratings from CMS for overall quality and safety since 2016. You can learn more at smh.com. Well, the corporate training programs at USF now include classes in human resource management, project management, process improvement, people management, and more. You can register online at programs.usf.edu/corporate training. Partly cloudy skies in the forecast tonight. Spectrum Bay News 9 Chief Meteorologist Mike Clay says we'll see a low about 63. And then tomorrow and Sunday, partly sunny skies with a high of 82 degrees both days and also a 10% chance of showers.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Audie Cornish. NPR's Invisibilia is back. It's a podcast that explores the invisible forces that shape our lives. And our first episode this season is about pain.
Over the last 5 decades, the way our culture thinks about and treats pain has changed dramatically. Today, Invisibilia's Elise Spiegel tells us about a little-known event that helped propel that change.
There are parts of this story that you know well, and parts you've never heard. The part that you know, have probably heard so much you're almost numb to it, is the sad part where people all over the country are dying, casualties of the opioid epidemic.
Snohomish County recently saw 7 opioid overdose deaths in one weekend alone.
And here in the Sioux Falls area alone, 13 people have died of overdoses.
Staten Island has seen more than 24 overdoses in just the past 3 weeks.
70 deaths in Cuyahoga County.
With more than 2,000 overdoses expected by year's end.
Of course, many different factors contributed to this terrible epidemic. Aggressive drug companies, pill mills run by unethical doctors. But in the medical community, there are people who make the argument that the opioid epidemic could not have happened if, starting in 1995, the medical profession had not been taught to think about and respond to pain in this new and radically different way. Which brings me to a man named James Campbell and the insanely clever idea he had in the shower one day.
I don't recall one lecture about the field of pain in my medical school. Pain was off topic.
James Campbell, the gifted son of a Midwestern electrician, went to medical school in the 1970s when pain was seen as almost irrelevant to the task of being a doctor. Pain was seen as a symptom, not an actual disease or injury, so doctors didn't feel like there was a pressing need to address it. But Dr. Campbell felt this attitude towards pain was wrong. In his practice, he would see patients so crippled by back pain they were unable to leave their house to make a living. Cancer patients so shrunken in agony they were unable to engage with their families, and it really bothered him. Why wouldn't they take it more seriously?
There is a history of regarding pain as predictable and expected as part of life.
This is a medical historian from Princeton named Keith Whaley, and he says this idea that pain was normal started falling out of fashion in the 50s and 60s. See, there was serious political change, the civil rights movement and women's lib, a small but growing sense that society needed to think more seriously about all kinds of experiences that it never took seriously before. So the idea that pain was something to acknowledge, explore, and actively address was growing. The problem was that traditionally, medicine only focused on things it could measure, like blood pressure or temperature. For doctors, if you couldn't measure it, how did you know that it was real?
So it's in this time period that you have the invention of that questionnaire that we all have probably heard at some point on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst pain that you've ever had. How would you rate your pain right now?
With this simple questionnaire, pain suddenly became a thing that you could count like white blood cells. But even the pain scale didn't do a ton to improve the treatment or status of pain in the medical world. Then one day, in 1995, James Campbell stepped into his bathroom.
I think literally I was in the shower on a Sunday morning, and the idea of pain, the fifth vital sign, popped into my head.
Pain, the fifth vital sign. Vital signs are the rock stars of the medical world. They're the critical measures that everyone agrees deserve star treatment because they're essential to life. And until the morning James Campbell stepped into his shower, for hundreds of years, there had only been 4.
Blood pressure and then pulse, temperature, and breathing.
So if Dr. Campbell could get pain established as the fifth vital sign, pain would go from being a D-list celebrity to basically Beyonce. The only potential problem with this plan is that pain is not, at least usually, an indication that there is something critically wrong. And Dr. Campbell knew it.
Well, strictly speaking, pain wouldn't be a vital sign, because a vital sign would be a manifestation of the physiological function in the body that's vital to life. So it's vital in the sense of being associated with being alive.
But Dr. Campbell still thought elevating the status of pain would do more good than harm. And since in 1995 he was president of a medical organization called the American Pain Society, he used his presidential address to launch a campaign, and the idea caught fire. Over the next few years, lots of groups made pain a priority. For example, the Veterans Health Administration put out a toolkit which taught doctors and nurses exactly how to treat pain as...
Yeah, it was really amazing, because it transformed